Okay, hello everyone. Good afternoon and thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Larrakia people, the traditional owners of the land on which we're all meeting here today, and pay my respects to elders past and present and to emerging leaders. And I also extend that respect to all Aboriginal people here with us today and to the many community leaders, organisations, service providers and families whose knowledge, leadership and continued connection to country are central to the work that we are discussing. So, first of all, I'm Margaret Close. I'm the Deputy CEO at the Department of Housing, Local Government and Community Development. I'm not here today to talk about housing delivery specifically. I'm here to talk about empowering the bush and local government reform. So it's a privilege to be here today to talk about an aspect of the department's reform agenda that is especially relevant to this audience, empowering the bush. And as our CEO outlined yesterday, this is a whole of government approach which is designed to strengthen community decision making, enable place-based community development, and improve the delivery of services in regional and remote communities. So today I'm going to talk a bit at the conceptual level about the framework and a couple of our key service pathways, which are local government reform and place-based community development. And then I'm going to talk about what implementation of this framework looks like so far. Okay, so the NT government, as a number of people know, released the NT Aboriginal Affairs Framework in March this year. It sets out this government's vision for delivering improved outcomes for Aboriginal Territorians, and it's got 6 strategic priorities. And the second one is empowering the bush. And as outlined in that framework, empowering communities isn't optional. It forms a foundation for safer, more resilient and self-reliant regions. And at its core, our Empowering the Bush strategic framework is our approach, this government's approach to strengthening, as I said, community decision-making, place-based community development, and improving service delivery. And the reason it's framed in this way is straightforward. Decisions about governance, service delivery and infrastructure are absolutely interconnected, and they need to be considered together rather than in isolation. So in implementation terms, that means building approaches that are locally informed, flexible enough to reflect differences between communities and structured enough to support long-term delivery. It also means recognising that community confidence depends on whether people can see a clear connection between what they have said, the decisions that are made and the action that follows. And importantly, this reform agenda, we are trying to achieve practical change. So it's about strengthening culturally legitimate governance, improving accountability in local service delivery, and creating better alignment between communities, government investment and service delivery, while also maintaining service continuity and supporting development regionally. So in other words, it's not change for change's sake. It's designed to make systems work better, closer to community, and in ways that respect the authority, knowledge and aspirations that already exist in community on the ground. Okay, so under this Empowering the Bush framework, there are 4 key pathways that we are working through across the department and across government. And the first is local government reform, or perhaps more appropriately, local governance reform. So this responds to calls from community for increased autonomy, accountability and local control within regional and remote communities. And I'll talk more about this later in the presentation. The second is place-based community development through investment in communities or community clusters under the Agreement on NT Remote Aboriginal Investment. So that's around community-led development to support cultural governance and create better outcomes. Again, I'll talk about that a bit further on in the presentation. The third is honouring the range of existing local decision-making agreements. So there were 20 that were formed prior to kind of mid-2024, and under this pathway, we've made it clear that we will uphold the commitments in those agreements and progress them where possible and to support long-term partnerships with those organisations and communities. The fourth is a core kind of part of our department's, function and role, and this is around strengthening our core community development service. So this is about the work we can do as a department, working across government to align our government investment in infrastructure planning with community development priorities and embedding those practices that build community decision-making and improve social, cultural and economic outcomes through the programs and services that we deliver as a department and through the programs and services delivered by other parts of government. So as I said today, I'll be talking about the first two of these 4 pathways, so that's local government reform and the place-based community development. I guess the key message that I want to give is that all of these 4 pathways are connected. As I said, they give us together a practical way to move from what is the broad policy intent to on-the-ground action that we anticipate and hope will be felt and experienced by communities. And I guess additionally and most importantly in this, communities are our active partners in this, in shaping the governance structures, the programs and the services that reflect their cultural authority, their needs and their aspirations. Okay, so I'll go to the first talk about the NT Ray place-based community investment. So I think a number of people over the last couple of days have mentioned the NT Ray. So this is the agreement for Northern Territory remote Aboriginal investment. So it's a 6-year agreement from 2025 to 2031 through which the Commonwealth Government funds the NT Government and APONT to support remote Aboriginal communities. So those who've been around the Territory for a number of years know that this agreement has existed in a number of forms over a number of years to provide supplementary funding into the NT for a range of programs, certain health programs, family safety, women's safe houses, remote policing and otherwise. But this agreement, the current iteration, is the most significant one yet, and that's not just because of the level of funding provided, which is significantly greater, but also because it's not just funding us and the NT Government to deliver service, it's also funding APONT as well to support capacity building and accountability and learning over the life of the agreement. And in particularly relevant for today's discussion, it's got for the first time a program, a schedule to fund place-based community development. So our department is responsible for administering that program with our NT Ray partners, so that's and communities, so with the government, with APONT and so forth, and everyone has been involved in developing what the program will look like and informing how we take this forward. And it represents an investment at over 78 million over 6 years. So it's one of the kind of, for us, very important implementation mechanisms for the broader Empowering the Bush agenda. So the program is designed around 3 linked streams, and I've got them up there on the slide. So 3 funded streams. So the first is the community-led development activities. So this includes things such as supporting recognition and development of local leadership, developing community-led plans, improving delivery and decision-making around government services and supporting transition of services to community control. The second is community-led jobs, training and business services. So this is to support the development of local economy, jobs, training and business services. And lastly, there's money in there to either expand or refurbish community infrastructure to support the community development program, so support the delivery of those activities. So when we're talking about place-based community development here, we're not talking about just a broad aspiration, we're talking about a program structure that is intended to support local planning, local leadership and visible on-the-ground outcomes. Okay, so as I've said, the NT Ray operates as a partnership and its delivery is overseen by a joint steering committee that's comprised of NT Government, Commonwealth Governments and APONT, so APONT member representatives and nominees. So in terms of the development of this particular program, we are close to be able to start the implementation, which will begin in the next financial year. So we've been working for the last number of months to kind of establish what this program looks like with partners and go, okay, this is how we're going to roll it out and so forth. And what we've agreed to is that there will be at least 8 sites over the life of the investment, and we've mapped those 8 sites through to June 2029, and as I said, this is an agreement that runs to 2031. So as you can see, by the first year, we're going to have 3 sites established, 6 by 30 June 2028, and then we've got 8 by 2029. And as I said, that's the minimum that we're looking at. So we're doing this as a staged approach, particularly to allow us to learn, adjust and build on what works, and while still maintaining kind of momentum and accountability. And I think importantly for this agreement, for the first time, there is significant investment in a monitoring, evaluation, accountability and learning framework, and APOINT is a particular recipient and is driving part of the delivery of that framework. So we will be able to see over time how this is working, whether it's delivering the outcomes we want, and whether we need to rethink or pivot in another direction. Okay, so the next thing, just talk briefly before I go into local government reform, is to talk, I suppose, more broadly about what we're doing to strengthen the legislative kind of foundation for local government in the Territory. So local government, of course, plays an absolutely critical role in delivering particular services and infrastructure across all regions, and they do this through the legislative framework, which is the Local Government Act. This is pretty technical, I'll get over it pretty soon. So in Parliament this year, there's been a number of amendments to that Act. Most recently, they made changes focusing on governance, integrity and accountability, and this was based on feedback from regional and local councils about what they needed to do to make sure that the system was working effectively and that members could be held to account and there was transparency and so forth. So these changes, which will commence hopefully in the middle of the year, have a new code of conduct framework, new governance support roles are being created that can assist councils who need assistance around governance and so forth. We've created clearer procurement and delegation settings, stronger training for elected members, and just some practical changes around elections and financial matters. I guess the core thing is, though, that these reforms are about creating a stronger and a much more transparent local government system. So why they are technical, they are very important work because, as we know, stronger governance settings create the foundation for better decision making, better accountability and more confidence in the local governance system on the ground. So, flowing on from that, when we're talking about local government reform in this broader Empowering the Bush agenda, we're really not just talking about changes to the Local Government Act and the way that councils are working, even though that is, of course, very important. We're really talking about local governance reform, about exploring ways that options with community that will deliver fair representation, restore community decision-making, and ensure efficient delivery of services and so forth in their relevant region. And so we're certainly not working from the assumption that there will be one model that will suit every place, because we're looking at a range of options. And broadly these are, and they're also on the slide, is potentially establishing new councils under existing legislation. Another one is strengthening ACCO-led delivery arrangements, or another alternative is creating smaller kind of council-type areas under a different model, if that's what communities want and what the evidence supports. So this is an important point to emphasise, is that communities, as you all know, are different. Their governance aspirations are different, and the delivery models that might be right in one region won't necessarily suit another. So I'll go through now a little bit more detail about those options. So the first option is one that probably you're all familiar with, which is the creation of a new council. This doesn't require any amendments to the law. The new council will be subject to the existing framework with elections, rate collections and so forth. And I guess the most recent example you'll be familiar with is the de-amalgamation of the Groot Archipelago Regional Council from East Arnhem Regional Council. The second option is more focused on an operating model rather than a governance structure, and that's about who delivers what services to the community, and we've broadly considered 2 variations. So the first is to establish formal agreements or contracts between councils and ACCOs for the delivery of an agreed range of services. So this might not require any legislative change. It also wouldn't provide any formal statutory powers to the ACCO under the Local Government Act. Another variation is to establish an ACCO as a municipal service provider. So that would be similar to the arrangement that a number of you might be familiar with over in Nhulunbuy, where they've established the Nhulunbuy Corporation to deliver municipal services to that region. So that would require kind of legislative changes, and you'd need to deal with things like liability, enforcement and so forth. And of course, important considerations that you'd need to consider to be clear on the scope of delivery of services, clarity between who's responsible for what, and who pays for what. The third model we've looked like, and this is kind of thinking up what could something that is outside the normal local government frame deliver for communities. So one of them is creation of smaller council areas or a new model or governance that picks up bits of the other ones. So areas could be unincorporated, for example, so no ability to correct rates, but then that would potentially allow flexibility to basically draw in other funding streams or, not have to deal with things like elections and so forth. We know that this could be the one that is able to deliver most what communities want. We also know it's going to take the most time to work through, just to understand what it looks like and potentially legislative changes and so forth. But of course, the key test for adopting any of these is the same. There needs to be community appetite, cultural legitimacy, financial sustainability, service continuity, and importantly, clear roles and responsibilities. So in other words, it's not just about a structural operational change, it's about making sure that change is practical and supported and workable over time. So on funding in particular, I do want to be clear that we have to think more broadly about what is just in the current local government funding pie. Depending on what models are established, there are likely to be other opportunities to leverage additional revenue generating and funding streams outside, as I said, that traditional local government frame. So, with all of these, in the end, we want to make sure that the reforms that do go ahead are responding to community voices, but they're also, clear, they've got legal clarity and can deliver on outcomes, they're operational viable and so forth. So, as I said, where some communities want that might be de-amalgamation, but it can also take a range of other forms, as I've said. Okay, so up to now I've talked very much at the conceptual level. So now I want to talk about what our Empowering the Bush reform team has been doing on a practical level to drive this forward. So we've got it's a small but powerful team currently of 4 people. They are been working to accelerate this local government reform with a particular focus on the Barkly region. So since February this year, they've undertaken extensive engagement across the region with traditional owners, local residents, the Barkly Aboriginal Alliance, Aboriginal corporations, private enterprise, and all 3 levels of government that are in the Barkly region. And as of today, I understand they've over 300 people and entities have been engaged, and many of them multiple times. So the team's working to a regular travel rhythm of 3 weeks in the Barkly and 1 week back in Darwin to allow repeat visits, continuing their discussions and, importantly, a stronger on-the-ground presence. We have staff who are resident in the Barkly, and we are trying to get some more at the moment, as we know that ongoing presence matters, because meaningful reform is definitely not built on a single visit, and we know that it's built through listening and returning and testing ideas and allowing communities the time and space to consider what they want future governance arrangements to look like. And you can see from the screen some of the places they've been. They have been driving around a lot. Apparently there was a rain cloud that prevented them getting out to some places recently, but certainly a lot of visits and a lot of talking to people. So we're progressing the work in the Barkly. You can see the 4 tranches there in clear stages. So first, responding to calls for action. Second, confirming community voices. The third, designing and developing governance options, and we're kind of just at the end of that stage now. And the 4th will be implementation and statutory execution. So because this is a big piece of work and there are some difficult questions in there, we'll be shortly bringing on some external assistance to help map through the regulatory and legislative changes and to support kind of any governance changes, make sure that we're clearly, working with communities and reflecting what they're after. And this is important, so as we move forward, communities have got confidence that this reform is not being rushed and that decisions are being informed by both those local aspirations, but also the practical realities of delivery. Because we know there are, questions about operational sustainability and staffing and a whole range of things like that. We want to work through that. We think this can work, we just want to make sure we do it right. So I guess with all of this, the key thing is that communities are not the passive recipients of reform they are the active partners in shaping the governance structures and so forth. So this is the shift that this framework is trying to make, and while we know this will take time, we know it's essential to do it if we want the systems that are more trusted, responsive, and better able to support the social, cultural and economic outcomes over the longer term. So just in closing, I guess the point that I'm keen to leave you here with today, and I know I can smell the food and I know everyone's keen to get out and have some lunch, empowering the Bush reform agenda is only meaningful if it changes how decisions are made, so that's by us in government, and how the work is delivered on the ground. So we know that the value will not be measured in just having the framework, but by whether communities can see that they have stronger local influence and clear pathways for participation and better alignment between what they see as priorities and government action. So that's the task in front of us. We know it's long-term work and we know it requires discipline, but importantly it requires partnership. But we think it offers real opportunity to build governance and service models that are more locally grounded and more responsible and sustainable over time. Thank you very much.